In the town of Ballybedig, deep in the heart of Ireland, there lived an old woman named Bridget Cleary. Now, she was an ordinary woman, by all accounts, except for one strange quirk. She loved telling stories. Every night before bed, she would regale her grandchildren with tales of fairies, goblins, and other mythical creatures that supposedly roamed the Irish countryside. The children would listen, wide-eyed and enthralled, as she described these fantastical beings and their mischievous, or sometimes malevolent activities. One night, after her grandchildren had gone to bed, Bridget decided to share a particularly eerie story with her daughter. Mary. It was a tale of a leprechaun who lived at the nearby Nakamura. Now, leprechauns are typically known as solitary creatures, but this one was different. He was part of a small clan, or so the legend went, and they were anything but friendly. They were, as Bridget put it, the most fearsome leprechauns in all of Ireland. Vicious, nasty, and cruel. Their leader, a particularly gnarled and malicious creature named Masheth, had a taste for human flesh. Now, despite being an old and presumably sensible woman, Bridget was never quite sure if these stories were just make-believe or if there was some truth behind them. Over time, the line between reality and fantasy had become blurred. In fact, she was beginning to believe that the story of Masheth, the cannibalistic leprechaun, might not be just a story. Meanwhile, across town, two young men named Patrick and Michael were getting ready for bed. Both were single and looking for a bit of fun. They decided to go to the local pub. As the night wore on, they drank heavily and began to joke about the ridiculous superstitions of the older generation. Bridget's story about and his cannibalistic cronies came up, and they both laughed it off as the product of an overactive imagination. On their way home from the pub, they decided to take a shortcut through Knockmore Bog. Legend had it that this was the very bog where Masheth and his fellow leprechauns made their home. Now, the bog was dark, and the narrow path was barely visible. But the two friends weren't worried. They were too busy joking around and trying to impress each other's girlfriends. Suddenly, Patrick stopped in his tracks. He could have sworn he'd heard the sound of laughter echoing through the bog. A cruel, mocking sound that seemed to come from all around them. Michael didn't hear anything and, annoyed by his friend's sudden silence, asked him what was wrong. Patrick just shook his head and tried to change the subject, but the laughter started again, louder this time, and it was then that he realized he wasn't alone. He turned slowly, trying to make out shapes in the darkness, and that's when he saw them. Standing in front of him were three figures, tall and gaunt, with skin like wrinkled leather and eyes that burned like hot coals. Leprechauns, he thought in horror, realizing that Bridget's story might be more than just a story. The leprechauns circled Patrick and Michael, their laughter echoing around them. They taunted the men, jeering and making obscene gestures. And then, as quickly as they had appeared, they vanished into the darkness, shaken but unharmed. The two men ran as fast as they could away from the bog, not stopping until they reached the relative safety of Patrick's house. Once inside, and locked the door against the possibility of pursuit, Patrick and Michael recounted their terrifying experience. To Patrick's family, of course, they were met with skepticism. No one believed that leprechauns, those supposed remnants of an ancient race of fairies, actually existed. But as the weeks went by, similar sightings were reported. People were seen running in terror from the bog, stumbling out of the darkness with wild stories of strange, sinister laughter and grotesque figures with burning eyes. Then the disappearances began. At first, it was just animals, livestock that was found dead, drained of blood. Then people began to vanish. The first victim was an old woman who lived alone on the edge of the bog. One moment she was there, tending her garden, and the next, she was gone, as if she had never been. Search parties were organized, but no trace of the missing woman or any of the others who vanished after her could be found. All that was ever discovered were strange markings left on trees near the bog, symbols that looked disturbingly like the leprechaun's taunts. As the body count rose, fear turned to panic. People were too afraid to leave their homes, and even during the day, the bog remained strangely silent. It was as if the mere presence of the leprechauns was enough to keep everyone indoors, determined to put an end to this terror. Once and for all, a group of armed men set out to the bog to confront the leprechauns, but when they got there, they found nothing. There were no signs of the creatures, no tracks or footprints, nothing. It was as though the entire area had been cursed, untouched, and unreadable by human eyes. In the end, the villagers were forced to abandon their homes and flee. The leprechauns were never seen again, but the terror they inflicted on Bailey Batag would never be forgotten. Was it a curse, a fairy tale come to life, or something else entirely? No one knows for sure. All that remains are the abandoned houses and the whispers of the wind through the long grass of Knockmore Bog. It was only after the village was deserted that the old woman, Bridget, came to truly believe the story of Matcheth and his cannibalistic kin. She stayed behind, hiding in the attic of her house, subsisting on what little food she could find, all the while listening to the sounds of the bog. Sometimes she would hear the distant laughter, the same cruel, mocking sound that still sends shivers down my spine when I think about it. And sometimes she would hear screams in the night, the last desperate pleas of another victim snatched away by the leprechauns, never to be seen again. And so the legend of the cannibalistic leprechauns of Knockmore Bog lives on, a chilling tale whispered around fires on dark nights, a reminder of the evil that may lurk just beyond our sight, waiting to pounce and drag us into the darkness. Now, if you've ever seen a leprechaun, let me know in the comments. And if you want to see more scary videos, then check out more content. And if you want to support the channel even further, then consider becoming a member, where you can watch videos early and get exclusive content. Thanks for watching.